This goes. All right. So I did put together a chart, okay, for a visual aid. Hopefully it helps. Um, look, my penmanship is not the best to begin with, and doing it on a whiteboard, I know. Well, you don't need to necessarily read it. Can you see over this? I can narrate it for you. I'll put the screen reader on. Okay. But yeah, I thought we'd do a visual aid just for reference. Like, I'm not going to teach through the chart right now. But so, like, we've been going through, it's basically like a survey of Bible doctrine, right? We kind of started with some things back there with Abraham at the beginning and all that. Well, really, we started with the Gentiles, how God gave them over and gave them up. And so, when he called out Abraham, he actually started something new. He made promises to Abraham and made covenants to Abraham. And so we've kind of traced that through, and we've seen how that, based upon those promises and stuff, the nation of Israel has a future. And so we've looked at a lot of those things. And so I kind of just wanted to put this up here for reference, because where we're at now is what we call the times of the Gentiles. And I wanted to really make sure we probably could have done without a second session in the times of the Gentiles. Excuse me. But I wanted to really make sure we understood how this all connects, right? How the judgments per Leviticus 26 for Israel's transgression of the law, that fifth course of punishment is the basis for what we're referring to here as the times of the Gentiles. And that phrase, times of the Gentiles, it only shows up once in the Bible in Luke 21. But and so there's no cross reference, right? There's no cross reference you can go to define what it is. But it's just expected that by the time you get to Luke 21, you're aware of the flow of history, right? And a lot of the things that we're looking at here are found in the book of Daniel. And that's kind of what we started looking at last week, because Daniel is a major prophet in your Bible, obviously, and he alone is actually given this panoramic view of world history, of in the midst of Israel's captivity in Babylon. He's given this panoramic view of history and allowed to see all these Gentile kingdoms that will rise up one after another. As Israel, the kingdom of Israel, is actually, as it says in Lamentations 5, I believe, the crown is fallen from our head, for we have sinned. See, that when they lost that crown, that kingdom had fallen. It was going to be subjugated to these Gentile forces, and it was going to remain that way until the Son of David came to reclaim that throne, right? Because when that happens, obviously it's going to be an eternal kingdom. And so, what's in view here is actually a succession of literal, physical, earthly kingdoms. Okay, and so when God makes that promise to David through I believe it's through Nathan, right? That, hey, you're going to have a son to sit on your throne and he's going to reign forever. We need to understand that in light of how it was understood in that context, which was a literal kingdom. Okay, we as Christians living in the dispensation of grace, we're so used to God doing a spiritual work, because that is what he's doing today. He's doing a spiritual work in the inner man of the saint, preparing them for something heavenly, right? We don't see him involved in the things he was involved in the Old Testament, because he's not doing that. Right. So, but we've gotten so accustomed to that, we think that's just the way it always was. Well, go tell that to the children of Israel, who for thousands of years, that's not the way it was. God was intervening physically with signs and wonders and miracles. And he was doing all these things because what he was doing was establishing a kingdom. Right. And so so I'm just trying to make the point that when we talk about this kingdom that's Christ, it's going to be a literal physical kingdom. Okay. And, we think of the heavenly kingdom, and we might be inclined to think, well, that's just like spiritual and it doesn't really have form to it. But no, it does. The heavenly kingdom, like the earthly kingdom, has form. It's real. It's not just, like when people think, well, when you die, are you just some wisp of energy or like a spirit with no form? No, your spirit has form. It's like you. Okay. The things that God created have form and definition. They're not abstract or obscure. Okay. And so just like there's an earthly kingdom that is going to take place on the earth, that's going to be eternal, that's going to be under the lordship of Jesus Christ, he's also going to do the same in the heavens. There's going to be a heavenly kingdom. He's going to redeem both realms under his authority. Okay. So with all that being said, So we are looking at, the times of the Gentiles, and I just want to make sure we understand that the times of the Gentiles are. I want us to understand the relation of the times of the Gentiles to the judgments. Okay, the Levitical judgments for their transgression of the law. I know you probably can't see this, so I'm gonna move it out the way. So obviously you have the beginning back here, the fall, the flood, Babel. You have Abraham gets called out, and so they're elevated, right? Because of those covenant promises, they get elevated. The Gentiles are already down here. They persisted in their sin before the flood. God gave them up, gave them over, and then he, obviously he floods the world, saves Noah, and they immediately rebel again. The Tower of Babel. They did not make it very long, right? So human nature being what it is, all right, they persisted in their sin, and God gave them over to do those things. Well, he calls out one man, and he actually elevates them, right? He gives them covenants and promises that are unilateral, unconditional. And so, I've said this before, when we talk about circumcision, what is the circumcision? Because you'll hear me say that a lot, because it's a biblical word and concept that gets used a lot. And if you don't understand what that actually means, you'll just be inclined to think, well, that's just cutting off the foreskin, right? It's just a physical thing. But it's not. It signified something. It signified that elevated position and those covenant promises made to those people. That's what it signifies. All right. It really had nothing to do with, it did. Obviously, you had to do it, but it wasn't about the physical act as much as it was what it signified. Right. And Paul even addresses this in Romans 2, is like, if you're a Jew by nature, but you don't do the things of the law by faith, like your father Abraham would have done, then your circumcision is made uncircumcision. That physical thing you're a part of really doesn't matter, does it? Right? And so it signified something else. It signified the covenants and promises. Okay. Now I'm not going to get into the chart, but you see here, I have the judgments laid out. Okay. And those Levitical judgments that were prescribed, starting back in Judges, you had that first course of judgment with like sicknesses. Remember ague? Remember that word, which is like fever, sicknesses, and then their enemies would like come in and eat their crops. And so the book of Judges details this, right? And then you have an interlude of mercy right there with David and Solomon. But after that, Elijah, right? The broken kingdom, the barrenness of the land. And then with Elisha, right? The wild beasts. And then Jehu, around the time of Jehu. I just put Jehu here, but it's really a broader time. It encompasses more than him, but the sword, the famine. And then right here with 5:1, because you can actually break the fifth course up into sections, which we're not going to talk about that tonight, but this is the fifth course, right? And that's when that times of the Gentiles actually starts. Because what happens there is that fifth course of judgment begins, and they're taken captive out of their land, and the land is brought into desolation. And so when we're talking about the times of the Gentiles, that's what we're talking about, is this fifth course of punishment per the law, right? And what you're going to note, we're not going to get into it tonight, but next time when we do like the actual prophecy in Daniel 9 of the weeks of years, we're going to see how there's actually, well, we will kind of touch on it, how there's a gap, right? You see this big gap between the red? There's a gap implied in several of the prophecies we'll look at tonight. And when we get to Daniel chapter 9 and the weeks of years, there's a prophecy of years for a total of 490 years. You're going to see there's a gap there too. And then we're going to look in the Gospels and see how Jesus actually indicated there was going to be a gap. And so you have this timeline, but in between the fulfillment is this gap of time. And within this gap of time actually is something that wasn't disclosed to mankind before. And that's the time we're living in, okay? And so if you ever wondered what the book of Revelation is all about or what the basis of it is, it's this. Judgment, right? It wasn't ever accomplished. It never actually came to pass the way that it was prophesied to, right? It was actually put on hold, okay? And so that's just a little rundown of the chart to kind of help us, get a frame of reference for what we're talking about here, all right? So in the previous lessons, obviously, we discussed the 5 courses of judgment upon Israel. Okay, and so we look at Luke 21, and it's way too small. But Luke 21, as I said, that's the text where Jesus actually uses the term or the phrase "times of the Gentiles," and again, it's the only time that phrase shows up. So there's no cross reference, right? But what you can do is you go back into the Old Testament and you start to see like, hey, there's these courses of judgment. And then during that 5th course of judgment in that 70-year captivity, Daniel's given this this prophecy, this view of these Gentile kingdoms, right, that are going to subjugate Israel and their land until something happens. Okay. And so Jesus says in Luke 21, starting in verse 20, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written may be fulfilled. But woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress upon the land and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the seas and the waves roaring, men's heart failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Okay, so this time of judgment upon Israel is going to continue until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. But it's until. Okay, it's not something that's going to go on indefinitely, right? There's a fulfillment to these times. And when they're accomplished, just as Luke 21 indicates, they're going to receive this redemption. Okay, look up, for then your redemption draweth nigh. All right, now Isaiah in chapter 1 actually, I just picked one. Again, this stuff is all through the prophets, but look how Isaiah starts off his prophecy in chapter 1. And now Isaiah he's writing right here. Got to understand it, like between this and this, he's writing right here because, and he's seeing things that concern this and this. He's not seeing this. So there's this concept in biblical hermeneutics, or whatever you want to call it, called the mountain peaks of prophecy. And basically what that is, if you could imagine you're standing on like a mountain peak and there's other mountains around you and there's these wide valleys, but you can't see down in the valleys. You just see the next mountain peaks. That's kind of how prophecy is. These prophets got glimpses of things, but they couldn't see some of the gaps of time that were there, right? And so like Isaiah, what is it, Isaiah 9, like for unto us a son is given. Well, then it talks about him, how the government's going to be upon his shoulders. He's going to reign as a king. Well, that hasn't happened yet. A son was given. Where's the king? You see? And so, but the prophecy doesn't disclose that giant gap of time. And so that's the way it is with prophecy a lot of the time. There will just be these gaps in there, and you just kind of have to read it and figure it out. Not to just say like that you have to figure it out, but the prophets didn't all, Peter talks about this, how the prophets, they searched what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify when it prophesied the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow. Searching what manner of time, right? See, they didn't know the timing of things, okay? And so that concept, the mountain peaks of prophecy, will kind of help you with this. Like Isaiah's writing back here, and he's going to warn them, because what's going to happen is these Assyrians are going to come in and take out the northern tribes. And then, the Babylonians later are going to take out the southern tribes. So he's going to warn them, right? He's going to prophesy against them, but he's also going to give them glimpses of hope over here. Okay, he's going to see stuff over here and over here. All right. So, but Isaiah chapter 1, and I put verse 1 up there just so you can see who it's concerning. Verse 1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Okay, because again, us Christians in the 21st century, we just think everything's been the way it's been forever, and it's all about us. It's all about the church. It's not. It's about God the Father and his Son who's going to reign, right? And he has an agency to accomplish things in the earth, which would be Israel. And he has an agency, the body of Christ, which is a different agency for a different purpose, okay, concerning the heavens. All right, but I just want us to see that it's concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And if you just drop down to verse 21, how has the faithful city become a harlot? And he goes on to indict Israel for their transgression of the law, how there was justice and judgment, and now murderers, right? And so he goes on to indict them. And then if you just drop down to verse 27, he says, even after this indictment against them, Zion shall be redeemed with judgment. and her converts with righteousness. Okay? So, you got to understand when he's talking about Zion being redeemed with judgment and her converts with righteousness, he's referring to the people and the land and the city, right? And so, obviously, when it talks about, Isaiah 52:3 says that Israel sold themselves for nothing, okay, but they're going to be redeemed without money. So, her converts with righteousness, we know that Christ is going to pay for their sins, right? Christ paid for everybody's sins, right? So, but who's redeeming Jerusalem, the city, right? Because it's Zion. Zion shall be redeemed with judgment. And who's redeeming it, and who are they redeeming it from? See, Jesus says that Jerusalem's the city of the great king, Matthew 5:35. See, Jerusalem's the city where God has chosen to put his name and where Jesus himself is going to sit upon his throne. All right, it's going to be his land and his city, and those who trust in him are going to constitute that new nation. But again, we're not living during Israel's covenant program. Okay, we're not living during the days of Israel's covenantal program or prophecies. Okay, we're living during what Paul calls the mystery of Christ or the dispensation of grace. All right, we're not a nation. We don't become a part of that nation. We don't become spiritual Israel. That's not ever really taught in the Bible. Okay, so Israel's redemption occurs when Jesus returns to save them from the occupying Gentile forces, okay, effectively ending the times of the Gentiles, therefore ending that covenantal judgment prescribed against them. We see the destruction of Gentile armies detailed in Revelation 19. I mean, go read Revelation 19. When Jesus returns, he returns in flaming fire to take vengeance on all the armies who come against Jerusalem, okay? Now, when they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory, then they're to look up, because then their redemption draws near. See? So when they actually see him returning, that's when the redemption's drawing near. Okay, Titus 2:13 tells us in the body of Christ to be looking for that blessed hope now. We're not waiting to see Jerusalem compassed about with armies. You see, we're supposed to be looking for the blessed hope because we have already received the atonement. Right? See, the second coming of Christ is a different event than the catching up of the saints or the rapture of the body of Christ. Okay? The rapture, 1 Corinthians 15 calls it a mystery. It was a mystery. It was not revealed. All right? And that's part of a body of mysteries that was revealed to Paul. Okay? This obviously was not a mystery. I mean, we're reading about these things, elsewhere. And you can actually trace that stuff through the prophets and through the law. Israel's regathering to the land, the Lord's return in judgment. I mean, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied. Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints. Right? So from the beginning, they're prophesying of this stuff. Okay? They weren't prophesying the rapture of the body of Christ. Right? Anyway, the times that Gentiles are alluded to elsewhere in Scripture, of course, and it's actually a main theme from the Babylonian captivity onward. So just look at a few of them. You see this in Revelation 11, starting in verse 1. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. And so just like Luke 21, this is the context of this is that last 7 years. Oh, I'm sorry, not last 7 years. I apologize. It's the last half of the last 7 years over here. Now, we haven't done the timeline yet, so I'm not going to get into that. But contextually, this is talking about that last period of time over here. But that's part of something. You see, it's part of something bigger. It's part of the times of the Gentiles. Okay. Zechariah alludes to these times after the return from Babylonian captivity. In Zechariah chapter 12, look, starting in verse 2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. And so you see that all these nations are going to be against Jerusalem. Okay? I mean, and look, you see that here in Revelation. They're actually going to tread down the holy city 42 months. That's 3.5 years. That's the second half of that 70th week. Okay. So the redemption of Israel and Jerusalem, I've spoken of in Luke 21 and Isaiah 1, that didn't occur as a result of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Okay, so the Romans in AD 70, there was an emperor named Vespasian, and he had a son, Titus, who is a general. And Titus actually came against Jerusalem, and they absolutely destroyed it. Okay, um, but here's the thing: that redemption has to do with what? Buying back Jerusalem, buying back Zion, repurchasing it. Okay, well, did that happen in AD 70? Did the Rome did Israel regain their kingdom in AD 70? They didn't. You see, and so people will say that, well, this was all fulfilled in AD 70, but AD 70 didn't produce the things the prophecies say that need to happen. You see, that are going to happen. Okay, and so I mean, there's Jerusalem and Judea is still under Gentile occupation even today to some extent. Okay, and they were historically under exclusive Gentile occupation for the last almost 2,000 years. Right? It wasn't until early in the past century that Jews started going back to the land in considerable numbers. Okay, so if Israel's to be redeemed with judgment, and we see those judgments detailed in Luke 21, Jerusalem being compassed about with armies, right? The sword, the captivity, all those things in Leviticus 26. If they're to be redeemed with judgment, the city of Jerusalem is to be redeemed with judgment. Then the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD by General Titus could not be the fulfillment of those things, right? Because the judgment was supposed to actually cleanse her so that she could receive her kingdom promises. It was supposed to actually redeem her, right? Okay. I don't know if y'all are following what I'm saying there. You do? All right. So Jerusalem was not at that time redeemed from the hand of the Gentiles. You see what I'm saying? Because when Jesus returns in judgment, he's taking it back. You see, that didn't happen in AD 70. This Gentiles continued to possess Jerusalem. All right. Not to mention the fact that Luke 21 makes it clear that the context is, of course, the return of the Lord. All right. So obviously that didn't happen yet. And just, I know I answer a lot of objections that y'all probably aren't even aware of, but there's a large number of Christianity who they do not believe that they do not believe the scriptures the way we do. All right, they think that there is not going to be a millennial kingdom. They don't think the Lord's going to return and reign on the earth for a literal 1,000 years. They don't believe that stuff. Okay, and so I answer a lot of objections. They think that a lot of these prophecies are talking about AD 70. Oh yeah. They think the preterism. It's called preterism. They think Revelation already in the past. Everything in there is all just history. It's already been done. And so we're going to answer a few objections about that tonight. And if you don't know about it, well, it's probably good to at least hear about it so you can kind of get familiar with some of the arguments that are out there and why they're wrong. If you just read the Bible and believe it, you can see it's wrong. But so I mean, I always wonder why people are like that, and I've come to the conclusion it's just a faith issue. They just don't have faith in the words of the Bible. But we're still going to deal with some of that anyway. So, they say, well, 80, everything was fulfilled in AD 70 by the Romans. But Jesus in Luke 19 says that there would not be one stone. And he's looking at the city, by the way. He's not looking at the temple. It says he looks at the city, and he says there's not going to be one stone left upon another when this happens. Well, there's a Western Wall over there today with stones still left upon it. So did they destroy it all or not? Did Jesus' prophecy fail or didn't it? You see, and besides that, there was actually 3 towers of the Herodians that were left. So that's a whole other story. But we're going to see in coming lessons also that the events of AD 70, they fall outside of the 490 years. AD 70 is over here. Well, technically, since there's the diminishing of Israel, AD 70 would be like over here. So there's a problem. What we're reading about, it has to be within the time frame of the prophecies, the prophetic timeline. AD 70 is way out here. So we'll look at that in more detail in the next lesson. But anyway, so when we look at to events that unfold in the course of this world, like Jerusalem's destruction in AD 70, we see parallels to things described in the Bible. And sometimes, people will assume that they just have to be the same because there's parallels. But I would just ask you, who runs the course of this world? Satan does. The princes of spiritual forces of wickedness in high places, they're currently in charge of the world system, and that's not even speculation. The Bible tells us this plainly. We actually learn in the book of Daniel that there's satanic principalities who helped give rise to the Greek Empire. That there was already principalities involved in these things that were in rebellion against God, which shows us actually that God is even able to use those that are in rebellion to him for his purposes. But as Job 5 says, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. Okay. But anyway, in the course of world history, there are and have been satanic forces working behind the scenes to direct events, okay, in the realm of human affairs. So it's no wonder, therefore, that we see some of the same patterns like come up again and again, right? Ecclesiastes 1:9, in view of man's carnal affairs in this world, teaches us that the things that have been will be again. All right, and that there is no new thing under the sun. And that's not speaking to things in reference to God. God in Isaiah 43 says, "Behold, I do a new thing." Okay, so it's not talking about God or what he's doing. It's talking about the vanity of man and mankind's world system and their philosophy and their wisdom. There is no new thing. Okay, the nature of man, the nature of fallen angels for that matter, it is what it is, and it's going to always produce the same fruit. All right, and so, you see these, like I said, you see these same patterns kind of pop up in history. We see in the book of Esther, Haman trying to annihilate the Jews. And then you have that same spirit at work in a man named Adolf Hitler. Like, why is it that these same kind of events take place over and over again, right? You see these judgments take place in Egypt. Well, Revelation depicts these same type of judgments coming in the future, right? History, it's not cyclical, but the patterns of history kind of are, okay? And we see this principle of type and shadow over and over again in the Bible, or prefigurement. There's certain things that happen that act as figures for things to come. And we're actually going to see this with a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. But such is the case with the 10 toes of the image. Do y'all remember the image from last time? How Daniel saw the image of the man, and there was the head of gold, which was Babylon, then the arms and chest of silver, which was Medo-Persia, and then belly and thighs of brass, which was Greece, legs of iron, which was Rome, and then these feet that were of iron mixed with clay. And there was 10 toes, right? Well, such is the case with the 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2. Some individuals, they'll see the 10 toes and they draw a parallel to Rome, because see, what happened to Rome was Rome split between East and West. And so you had an Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire. If you ever wondered why there's an Eastern Orthodox Church and a Roman Catholic Church, that's what that's from. When they split, they kept their religion the way they wanted to keep it, right? And so there was a split in the Roman Empire, but over time, that Western Roman Empire actually kind of, I don't want to say dissolved because that's not technically true, but it gave rise to 10 smaller little kingdoms. I don't know if I really call them kingdoms, but it did give rise to 10 smaller powers, right? And so historically, this would be like the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Franks. You don't need to know all of them, right? The Visigoths, the Anglo-Saxons. Have you ever heard those kind of groups of people? That's where that comes from, was that Roman Empire that broke down, okay? And so some people, historicists, people that say, well, Revelation already happened, or in this case, the 10 toes, that was Rome, it's already done. Sorry. They'll say, the 10 toes, that's just historical Rome, okay? But there's a problem with that interpretation. The times of the Gentiles are a judgment determined upon Daniel's people, upon Israel, right? And those empires were part of that succession of Gentile kingdoms that were supposed to be used in judgment against them, right? Well, some of these empires, most of them actually were not necessarily hostile to the Jews. I think the Ostrogoths and Lombards were actually pretty friendly to the Jews. Not only this, but none of them, except I think the Franks, and I believe it was I got it here, 1099, during the First Crusades, the Franks were the only ones to actually sack Jerusalem. So these 10 toes really had no particular or significant impact on the Jewish populations, in the sense that they were like judging them, or the Jews at that point were already displaced. So so there's really no context for them for these kingdoms fulfilling what those Gentile empires were supposed to fulfill, if it was. Do you see where I'm going with that? All right. So even without knowing any of the history, the Bible says that in the days of these kings, these 10 toes or 10 horns, right? the God of heaven is actually going to set up his kingdom, and that kingdom would last forever. So in the days of the kings, I really just need the image up there, but I don't have it. So in the days of these kings, the 10 toes, God is going to set up a kingdom. Well, did that happen? Did God set up a kingdom during the time of these 10 divisions of the Roman Empire? You got to understand, those divisions of the Roman Empire, those 10 kingdoms that came from the Roman Empire, didn't show up till between the 3rd and 4th centuries, I believe. So you're telling me that God of heaven set up a kingdom in AD 300 to 400? You see, their interpretation doesn't work, right? It's very loose with the text. It doesn't actually work when you trace out the history. Okay. So those who believe the 10 toes are the Roman Empire will say that everything was fulfilled in the 1st century AD. And when Jesus died, was buried, and rose again, his eternal kingdom was established, but it was just spiritual only. Well, like I said earlier, well, that's interesting because all the other kingdoms have been physical. Why is it you come to the one that concerns Jesus Christ and you say, well, no, it's not physical, it's just spiritual? Do you see what I'm saying? Well, you're robbing him of his inheritance. He is the last Adam. He is going to inherit the earth. Okay. All right. But so, as I said, there's a problem with that interpretation, mainly just because these 10 kingdoms, they arose hundreds of years after Christ. So it wasn't during the days of those kings that God set up his kingdom, even if it was spiritual only, which it's not. But even if it was, you're saying he set up his spiritual kingdom hundreds of years after he died, was buried, and rose again? See, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. So not only this, but the little horn, if y'all recall, we looked at Daniel 7 as well, and we saw the vision of the 4 beasts. Sorry, my throat's acting up pretty bad. Yeah. So when we looked at the beasts in Revelation, Daniel 7, we saw that there's a little horn that arises from the 10 horns. And so the historical view will assert that the little horn was the Roman Emperor Nero. Have you ever heard that? That Nero was actually Antichrist? A lot of people believe that. Yeah. Yeah, they configure some things to make it work out, the maths, as they say. And so some people will say, well, Roman Emperor Nero was the Antichrist, that he fulfilled the role of Antichrist. But you got to understand, Nero came before these 10 kingdoms, but the little horn arises from the 10 horns. So how did he arise from kingdoms that came hundreds of years after him? Do you see the inconsistency in the logic? Okay, so the little horn, as described in the Bible, is actually going to make war with the saints until the Ancient of Days comes and allows the saints to possess the kingdom. Well, if the spiritual kingdom was brought in with the death, burial, and resurrection, and the little horn is Nero, whose persecution of the Christians began in 64 AD, 30 years after the death, burial, and resurrection. Some 30 years, that's just a general number, but about 30 years after Christ died, was buried, and rose again. How is he the Antichrist? You see that? Because Daniel says that he's going to persecute the saints until the Ancient of Days comes and sets up his kingdom. But see, the historicist view, when they make Nero Antichrist, they're saying, well, the persecution came after Christ set up his kingdom. It doesn't make any sense, you see. So hopefully somebody comes along and hears this and see, this helps somebody, because I'm just seeing more and more people kind of fall into this historicist interpretation of the Bible, and it's just so easy to disprove. But anyway, I won't go there. So that same spiritual wickedness that was in Nero, which Satan was at work in these people. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The spirit of John wrote in the 1st century that there are yet many antichrists even now. So it's not like we're denying that there's a spirit of Antichrist at work in these people. The same spirit that was in Nero, is the same spiritual wickedness that was in Antiochus Epiphanes, who we're going to learn about in a little bit. It's the same spiritual wickedness that was probably in Adolf Hitler. It's the same spiritual wickedness that's going to be in the Antichrist, the beast, or the man of sin. Okay, so this thing keeps recycling and repeating itself. Okay, and those spiritual forces, they're trying to push the world in a very decisive direction. All right, now there is a very definite point in studying prophecy, and this series, if you will, is not it's not technically about prophecy, right? We're going somewhere with this. Okay, so I didn't intend for this to be an in-depth study of prophecy, um, but I thought we would just look at some things as we're on the subject. But there is a point in studying prophecy, as we looked at in the last lesson, Romans 16, how it's by the scriptures of the prophets that we're going to actually be able to come to an understanding of what Paul is talking about when he talks about the mystery of Christ. Because if you don't understand what's in the prophets, you won't come to the place where you see Paul's teachings as a deviation from the prophetic scriptures. Like there are unbelievers and heretics and cults, and there's a lot of people out there who recognize the deviation, but they come to very erroneous conclusions about it. And so what we're doing is actually really important, because I hate to say it like this, but Christianity, like true biblical Christianity, depends on understanding Paul's apostleship. The farther you get away from that, the farther you go into apostasy. I mean, that's just the way it is. All the Christian fundamentals that you know as like by grace through faith alone, by Christ's work alone, all those kind of things, not being under the law and stuff, those are Pauline concepts. You don't find those outside of his letters. So the farther you get away from understanding that the church of today is found in his letters, the farther away you go from the truth, the farther you go into apostasy. I met a man. I was trying to witness. Well, I guess I was trying to argue with the man. I was trying to discuss something with the guy when we did outreach last time, and he was seeing some of the things we're talking about. But again, he came to very erroneous conclusions. But see, if he had been taught the way it really is in truth, he wouldn't have been led down that path. You see, and so people are getting caught up in things they really don't need to. Okay, so I mean, Paul writes his second epistle to the Thessalonians in order to correct their misunderstanding of certain doctrinal elements concerning the prophetic timeline. Okay, I mean, he even says, like, look, when I was with you, like, he gives them this discourse on the man of sin and how like, don't be soon troubled in mind or shaken as if the day of the Lord had come, or as that the day of Christ had come. Right? Because look, the day of Christ cannot come unless a falling away come first. And he basically says, like, look, don't you remember when I was with you, I told you these things? So Paul taught them prophecy. All right. So I just say that because there's a lot of people who discourage studying prophecy. Like, oh, it's too hard to understand. It's really not. I mean, we've seen like how it's basically the same thing is said over and over again in a lot of ways. And so it's really not too hard to understand. So why is it being discouraged? Like, why should we not be studying prophecy? All right. I think we do need to study prophecy. And so even though this isn't an in-depth study of prophecy, I'm just trying to lay a foundation. And as we're going, I thought we would talk about some of these things in Daniel. So now let's kind of get back into Daniel here. We left off last time looking at two prophetic visions, Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. And we saw that those visions were given interpretations, right? How they represented a succession of Gentile kingdoms that would exist up until the time in which God would actually establish his kingdom in the earth. The common, what is it?
Oh, I thought we were one in Daniel.
Yeah, we are. We're not there yet. I mean, I can put it on there if you want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the common understanding of the vision in Daniel 2 is that the legs represent Rome, right? That's not really debated. Like, even people of the most heretical views, they pretty much acknowledge, yeah, the legs are Rome. So I think, and there's no problem there. But then a lot of people will assert, well, the feet also represent Rome. And this view that the feet represent some form of Rome, whether a divided Rome or a weakened Rome, or a revived Roman Empire, this kind of thing. This view is held by people who believe in a future kingdom and futurists, and it's also held by historicists, people who think it's all been fulfilled already, preterists, if you want to call it that. So both sides believe that, often believe that the feet indicate a revived Roman Empire or a historical Roman Empire. All right, that it's somehow Rome. So the futurist view believes that the kingdom represented by the feet and toes is yet to come, but they signify a revived Roman Empire, okay, which is going to exist at some unknown point in the future. And while I believe the kingdom depicted by the feet and toes is future, I don't think that the scriptures actually teach us to think of it in terms of a Roman Empire. I think contrary to that, actually, we're supposed to think of it quite differently. Obviously, I think there's some aspect of the Roman Empire characterized by the legs of iron to be found in this last Gentile kingdom. Okay, Daniel 2 says that the feet and toes are partly iron, partly clay. So I don't think we're to understand the kingdom represented by the feet and toes as entirely synonymous with the legs or with Rome, but that it's something distinct and yet containing an element, you see, of the legs of Rome. Okay, and I'm going to show you all this here. Daniel 7 refers to the fourth beast as being diverse. Okay, it means different. It's different from all the rest. Okay, and what we see in the parallel passages when we compare them is that this fourth beast of Daniel 7 appears not to just have an element of the Roman Empire, but also elements of the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and Grecian empires in it. Okay, so look at it here. Daniel 7 through 8, and down in verse 19 as well. After this, I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. Okay, so there's your iron. Okay, and it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Down in verse 19, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass. So we get something there. We get that he has iron teeth and nails of brass, and he's diverse. But when we jump ahead to Revelation, which is another vision of this beast, okay, we get more details. We also see that he was like unto a leopard, okay, and he had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. Okay, well, there's Babylon, the lion, right? There's Medo-Persia, feet of a bear, and there's Greece, the leopard. You see? And so when you compare both passages, you see that it's actually not meant to be understood as a revived Roman Empire. It's supposed to be seen as a compilation or a composite of all these preceding Gentile kingdoms that existed. Okay? And so what we have to understand is that each successive Gentile kingdom maintained the same godless spirit of Babel as its predecessor did. Okay? They all held to a plurality of gods which deified natural things such as the sun, the rain, etc. And they would also assimilate into their pantheon of gods, the other culture's gods. Okay. An example of this is what we would call interpretatio. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Interpretatio Romana. Okay. Where the Roman Empire would syncretize Greek gods with their own, right? To match to basically they would adapt their myths and values in regards to a particular god. For example, like Greek Zeus became Jupiter. Okay. Aphrodite became Venus, right? They just kind of took their gods and incorporated them into their belief system. And a lot of cultures did this. So the paganism didn't really go anywhere. It just was kind of passed down. It snowballed. It just kept accumulating, if you could think of it like that. So let's skip down here. Y'all want to take a break? Let's take a little break. Y'all excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So, all right. So when we turn our attention to the biblical descriptions of the fourth beast, we find it actually incorporates aspects of the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. Okay, and we see that in Revelation 13. Now, some might ask how it is that, if the feet and toes of iron and potter's clay represent the final Gentile kingdom, the kingdom of the Antichrist, which is going to consume the whole world, right? Such that none can make war with it, right? Who can make war with the beast? Then how then can it be that Daniel 2 depicts it as partly strong and partly broken? Okay, and I have an idea about this. There's a lot of ideas out there about it. Nobody has the answer, so that's okay, right? But I have an idea about it. I'd just like to throw it out there. So just for your consideration, what does God often liken the nation of Israel to? We looked at this a few lessons ago. Potter's clay. God likens the nation of Israel to potter's clay, right? Daniel 2 says, in reference to the feet of iron and clay, potter's clay, they will mingle themselves with the seed of men, but shall not cleave one to another. And yet it doesn't tell us specifically who's being referred to. That word mingle is used several times to refer to Israel mixing with pagan Gentiles. Okay, so Jerusalem, the faithful city, we saw in Isaiah 1, became a harlot. Okay, she wanted to act like Babylon, so God sent her to Babylon. And though many left Babylon eventually, Babylon didn't fully leave them. And we see in Revelation that there is a great whore named Babylon, who is that great city that reigns over the kings of the earth, who rides upon the beast. And yet that beast is going to hate the whore, okay, and burn her with fire, it says. And so we see that there's this conflict within that last kingdom between the whore, Babylon, and the beast and his system. Okay, so there appears to be an alliance between apostate Israel and the Gentile powers, but that these will not cleave to one another ultimately. Okay, and like I said, I can't be dogmatic about the feet being a representation of that, but that's how it seems to be for me right now, at least. So anyway, it's just for your consideration. So although this fourth beast is almost universally accepted as Rome, scriptures don't teach us to understand it as synonymous with Rome, but rather as a composite and an extension of the Gentile kingdoms which preceded it. Outside of Daniel chapter 2 and one verse from Daniel chapter 9, there's nothing to indicate that this final kingdom is some sort of revived Roman Empire. Daniel 2 says that the final kingdom will be divided. It doesn't say that the fourth kingdom will be divided and result in the final kingdom, but that's how a lot of people read it. Okay, it just says that the final kingdom is going to be divided. Similarly, there's a misinterpretation of a verse in Daniel 9, which leads some to conclude that the final Gentile empire will be revived Rome. But when the stone cut without human hands destroys the image, it destroys the gold, silver, bronze, iron, and feet of iron and clay together. Okay, if you go back and read Daniel 2, it destroys them all together. Okay, and we see all of those elements when we compare the images, right, together in one beast. So in order to better understand this, we're going to look at Daniel chapter 8 real quick. Daniel chapter 8. And let's just start in verse 1. In the third year of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns. And the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. There was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And out of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south, and towards the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. So that's a mouthful, I know, but when's the last time or the next time you're ever going to read Daniel chapter 8, right? But so the beautiful thing about the scripture is it's a self-authenticating, self-interpreting document. We don't have to wonder what it means, because guess what? Daniel 8 goes on to tell us exactly what it means. So we'll just go ahead and read the interpretation real quick. Starting in verse 15, and it came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So there it is. The ram with two horns is Media Persia. He tells us that. And the rough goat, verse 21, is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace he shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So, the first great horn of the Greek Empire, it mentions this first king of the Grecian Empire. We know historically that was Alexander the Great, okay, who conquered the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander the Great, of course, he dies an early death at the age of 32, and he has no children, okay? So what happens is his empire is actually broken up and divided between his four main generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Okay, so Cassander found what became known as Macedonia. You ever read about Macedonia? Some of these you read about some of these places, like in the book of Acts or whatever, they're named after these guys because they're the ones that actually divided up and owned, if you could say, ruled over these regions. So Antiochus, it's the same. It's named after Antiochus, Antioch. So Cassander founded what became known as Macedonia. Lysimachus founded Thrace and the western part of Asia Minor. Ptolemy took control of Egypt, and Seleucus over Syria. Okay, so these are the four horns that stood up in the place of the single horn, Alexander the Great. And yet, what we have described here in Daniel 8 is that another little horn is going to come from these four, and he's going to live during the latter time of their kingdom when the transgressors are come to the full, and that it will be in the last end of the indignation and at the end of times, or at the time of the end. And so I highlighted some of that for you. At the time of the end shall be the vision. I will make thee to know it. Shall be in the last end of the indignation, at the latter time of the kingdom. So we see the focus here is the end. Okay, I mean it says the indignation. I mean, it'll just draw our attention back to the board. It doesn't say indignation. It says the indignation. What is the indignation? It's talking about the judgment, right? That there's actually a prescribed judgment according to the law. Okay. And so it has this in view. Okay, it's not just anything, right? There's context. So it's the Lord's indignation. All right. So it's against the transgressors, right? When the transgressors are come to the full, well, not just anybody is a transgressor. Paul says that where no law is, there is no transgression, right? And so who's the transgressors? It's the ones who had the law. It's the ones who they transgress. God put a law down and they stepped over it. They transgressed it. And in these prophecies concerning this, you'll see God says he's going to destroy the transgressors and the sinners. And you'll see, like, Paul even makes reference to the sinners of the Gentiles. They're not transgressors, they're just sinners. You see, there's a distinction there in the wording. Anyway, so there is, again, a gap indicated by the prophecy here in Daniel chapter 8. Or just as we saw a gap in the empires implied by comparing the image of Daniel 2 and the four beasts of 7. Okay, do y'all remember that? I made an image this time. So you see how if you there's 10 toes on the feet. Let me just stumble over my words a few more times and I'll get it right. There's 10 toes on the feet and there's 10 horns on this beast. I still can't think of the word I'm trying to find. Correlate. There we go. Correlate. You correlate the feet, the 10 toes of feet with the beast with 10 horns, because here's the thing: there's 5 empires in the image. There's only 4 listed in the beast, in the vision of the beast. Why is there only 4? You see, like why leave one out? And why does the last one here and the last one there both have 10 attributes to it, 10 aspects to it? You see, I believe that this is supposed to be correlated with that. Okay, and so we saw that, okay, there's a gap here, because guess what, in the timeline of the 490 years, what we're going to see is that it's after the 483 years, after the 69 weeks, Messiah is going to be cut off. Who cut him off? They did. Okay, but there's a gap there. It's after the 69 weeks. Okay, and I know we haven't got to the timeline yet, but we'll see that next time, and I'll probably bring this back up just so we can compare it to the timeline. But there's a gap where Rome's at. Not the entire Roman Empire. I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a gap that exists there. Okay, and what we see here in Daniel 8, just as we saw a gap by comparing these two images, when we look at Daniel chapter 8, there's another gap that's implied. All right, Daniel 8, look, it doesn't address the Roman Empire. Why? Why was the Roman Empire as represented? Because look, Daniel chapter 8 goes straight from the Grecian Empire to the little horn. Well, Daniel 7 says that the little horn arises out of this last kingdom. Do you see what I'm saying? So the little horn arises out of the last kingdom. Well, Daniel 8, it goes straight from the Grecian Empire to the little horn. It jumps from here to here. The little horn arises from here, and it just jumps from here to a little horn. Again, it skips Rome. Why? Do you see that? Daniel 8 doesn't, it just goes straight from Lysimachus, Cassandra. It goes from the 4 horns of the Grecian Empire straight to the little horn. Do you see that? So again, a gap is implied. I don't know if y'all are tracking with me. Okay, cool. And so as I started to see this stuff, I started to think, well, man, this is like once, okay, but for it to happen several times, because it's going to happen again in Daniel chapter 11. All right, and it happens again in Daniel chapter 9 with the timeline. So there's a gap that's indicated. All right. So in Daniel 7, the legs of iron are conspicuously left out of the progression of kingdoms and the image of the beast. In Daniel 8, we see the third kingdom, Greece, is actually broken into 4, and from these 4 come that final king. Okay, so the vision, it entirely skips over Rome. Later, in Daniel 11, what we learn is that from these 4 Grecian dynasties emerged 2 dynasties in particular who become the main focus, the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid dynasties. Why? Okay, so I just put this chart up here, this map. Here's little Israel over here, right? So Ptolemy, he founded the Ptolemaic, I guess you would call it Ptolemaic Empire down here in Egypt and all that. And then Seleucia, I can't even say his name, the Seleucid Empire up here in the north. And they fight, they go back and forth vying for control over part of that territory there. But these 2 empires are what become the main focus. When you go read Daniel chapter 11, it's all about the king of the north and the king of the south. Okay, the other 2 horns from the vision of the 4 horns in Daniel 8 completely drop off. God doesn't care about them. Why? Because they don't concern Israel. You see, it's these 2 kingdoms that concern that land right there. And this land is God's land. This is where he's going to establish his kingdom, and this is where Christ is going to reign. And so these 2 kingdoms then become the focus. And so what you have in Daniel is it's narrowing it down for you. Okay, you go from very general, here's the progression of kingdoms to the end until Christ's kingdom. And then it kind of narrows it down for you. It gives you 4. It skips 1. And then you get to Daniel chapter 8, and it gives you 2, and then it gives you 1 horn. See, it's narrowing it down for you. It's honing in on what we're supposed to be looking at. Okay. And so let me just go back there. Now, there was a man who arose from one of these 4 dynasties, the Seleucid dynasty, named Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. Okay. And Antiochus, he rose to power in the Seleucid Empire in 175 BC and reigned until 164 BC. And during his reign, he persecuted the Jews. I mean, he outlawed circumcision. I mean, he made he was basically like Hitler, right? He was of that spirit, like I mentioned earlier, right? And he actually went in the temple and he tried to persuade them to sacrifice to idols, and he actually ended up sacrificing a pig in their temple and defiling their temple. And so if you ever wonder where the whole holiday of Hanukkah comes from, where it comes from is they rededicated that temple, and they had enough oil to let the lights burn through that whole purification process. So they call it the Feast of Lights, or whatever the case is. So that's where that whole thing comes from. It comes from that time period when Antiochus Epiphanes, during the intertestamental period where God was silent, wasn't speaking to them through prophets, right? Where he actually went in and defiled the temple. Okay. But so a lot of people will say that this little horn in Daniel 8 is speaking of Antiochus because it comes from the Grecian Empire. But what's in view here is not Antiochus Epiphanes, who is discussed in chapter 11, but rather it's another individual altogether. Okay, this little horn was mentioned in Daniel chapter 7 as someone who arises from the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the rest, and which had 10 horns. But Antiochus arose from the third beast. Okay, so Antiochus comes from the Grecian Empire of Seleucia. Okay, but the little horn is said to come from the fourth beast, the one that's diverse. See, when you start comparing all these images, you start to see that God's actually trying to show us something, right? It's not like here's a little horn and here's another little horn and here's another little. Why would he do that? That doesn't even make sense. He's trying to indicate something by these visions, right? So, therefore, Antiochus Epiphanes himself, he doesn't fit the criteria, okay? Because he didn't come from that fourth beast. He may fit the criteria of Daniel 8 as having emerged from the Grecian Empire, but he doesn't fit the criteria for let's just say hypothetically, right? Devil's advocate. Yeah, okay, he could possibly, if you make all the horns different, you could say, okay, yeah, Antiochus, he fits the little horn description, or Antichrist description, however you want to say it, in Daniel 8. But he doesn't for chapter 11, okay? Because what chapter 11 is going to do. Okay, let me just read this because I'm going to get all mixed up in my wording here. So the entire Bible only uses that specific phrase, little horn, twice. All right, it's here in Daniel's chapter 7 and 8. This little horn is described as first arising from the fourth beast, and as we move on to the next chapter, which assumes you've read the previous, we get additional detail. All right, the little horn would arise from one of the four Grecian dynasties. These visions are connected and meant to be compared and understood together, not random and disconnected. All right, and now obviously time's not going to permit us to go through all of Daniel 11. I didn't have enough time to go through Daniel 11 the way I'd like to in 2 weeks. So what we essentially have there is a prophecy detailing the events that transpire between these two kingdoms in the intertestamental period. Okay, and like in great detail. Like you have Cleopatra the First, you have Berenice. I mean, you have like very detailed prophecies being fulfilled between what's going on there historically. Like secular historians are like, this is so precise, we don't think Daniel could have wrote it. It had to have been written several centuries after the fact because it's so precise of the things it takes to account between these two kingdoms. Okay, but here's the thing. Once you get, okay, so like the chapter breaks down like this. There's the prophecy detailing the events that transpire between these two dynasties, the Ptolemaic and Seleucid, from verses 5 to 20. But from there, you have the exploits of Antiochus Epiphanes from verses 21 to 35. Okay, so it's all historical up to verse 35. But here's the problem. From verse 36 onward, you have a king described who's going to prosper until the indignation be accomplished. Well, when's God's indignation going to be accomplished? Okay, so there's that, and that's what it literally says in Daniel 8:19. Okay, but again, you have a gap of time implied in the text. In this instance, between Antiochus Epiphanes and this last Gentile king. Okay, or Daniel 11:36, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. Do you know who defeated him? The Maccabees did. Okay, and God wasn't even dealing with them at that time. So was it God? You see what I'm saying? Okay, I feel like I don't even have to go there because I think y'all get it. But look at Daniel 11:36. So some will say that this is a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes, but there's another more fatal problem with this interpretation. Okay, because this passage actually says that this individual is going to die in the land of Israel, right between the seas. That's between the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and the Mediterranean. Okay, right where Jerusalem or Mount Zion is. Okay, but here's the thing: everybody in the history world, anyway, knows that Antiochus Epiphanes died in what is now present-day Iran, or what was historically Persia. So Antiochus Epiphanes doesn't fit the bill. And verse 45 of Daniel 11, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end and none shall help him. So this man's going to die in the Holy Land, in the land of Israel, by Mount Zion. Antiochus Epiphanes doesn't die there. He died in Persia. Okay, and so what I'm trying to tell you is, again, in Daniel 11, it goes from historical to some future person. And it's narrowed it down even farther from not just the Seleucid Empire, but this is what this guy's going to look like and the things he's going to accomplish. He's going to look a lot like Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember how I said earlier, there's this concept of prefigurement, or like type and shadow in the Bible? Antiochus was a type of this man. And so, again, there's no Rome in the chapter. It goes straight from the Seleucid Empire to a little horn to Antiochus Epiphanes to this guy who's going to die in the Holy Land. And there's no indication of Rome or a Roman ruler in that text. So again, you have an implied gap. You tracking? Okay. Because people, and we're going to get into this when we do the timeline. I already knew that this was going to be a rough one. Well,
Chelsea, take that spoon out of that fruit. Elijah was just in there. I'm sorry.
Madness.
I was enjoying watching him be a little man and make his plate, and then he went.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
I was like,
It was inevitable. Yeah. Hey, you can enjoy watching a full-grown man do the same sort of thing.
yeah.
Speaking from experience.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel like I've lost everybody. Is everybody good? You're good? Okay. I know you're good. We were talking about it. Any questions, Sharon?
I hate history.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I'm not good at history. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm cool.
Okay. So just to sum it up, basically, Daniel is narrowing down the audience of where this person is coming from, right? He starts off with very general, just all the Gentile kingdoms, and he narrows it down until you get to somebody who's going to look like Antiochus Epiphanes from the Seleucid region, which is what we would call Syria, the region of Syria, which was historically Assyria, right? The Greeks shortened it, the name in, the way the Greeks referred to it was Syria. So that is that location there. This is where Syria was, right? And so, all right. Oh, okay. And so again, Antiochus Epiphanes is not who is in view here, as the indignation was not accomplished with the downfall of Antiochus Epiphanes. How could the indignation be accomplished with Antiochus in the 2nd century BC and in AD 70 by the Romans? You see what I'm saying? The historical view, it asserts everything has already been fulfilled. I'm sorry. The historical view that asserts everything has already been fulfilled, it's inconsistent, right? Because they say the temple was destroyed in AD 70, and so that fulfilled everything. But then you're saying that this is Antiochus Epiphanes, that he's the little horn. You see what I'm saying? And that the indignation of God is fulfilled on him. Well, how is it fulfilled on him and in AD 70 on the Romans? You see, they just mix stuff up. It doesn't actually work when you actually follow each thing out to its logical conclusion. So think about this. If the little horn is of the 4th beast, then he can't be directly correlated with Greece, who is the 3rd beast. All right, we know that this little horn of the last Gentile kingdom cannot be Antiochus IV simply because the Grecian Empire wasn't the last Gentile kingdom. Rome came after Greece. Okay, but neither can this little horn be understood to come from Rome, as the text of Daniel 8 and 11 make clear. This little horn, or the king of the north, as Daniel 11 refers to him, is meant to be understood as one who arises from Seleucia, from up here. Okay, the northern division of that one of those 4 Greek dynasties. Okay. And so this little horn can't be a historical figure of either the Roman or Grecian empires. He has to be someone future. All right. This last Gentile king and kingdom, therefore, is a composite, as I said, of all these previous Gentile empires, and arises from the territory historically held by the Seleucid Empire, which covered, what was known as Syria, which was where the Assyrian Empire was. And this little horn actually is referred to elsewhere in prophecy as the Assyrian. We'll just look at one. I mean, it comes up actually several times, but here in Isaiah 10, here's one clear passage, starting in verse 20. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote him, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. Is Israel doing that today? Is Israel staying upon the Lord in truth? No, they're not. Okay, that's not. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. For the Lord God of hosts shall make a consumption, even determined in the midst of all the land. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with the rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee after the manner of Egypt. Remember what I said earlier, how Egypt was a type of something that else was going to happen in the future? It's going to be after the manner of Egypt. This Assyrian is going to lift up his staff. Verse 25, for yet a very little while, and here it is again, the indignation. See how there's this common theme of the indignation. For yet a very little while, and the indignation shall cease, and mine anger and their destruction. Okay. And so the times of the Gentiles necessarily extends up to the point of God ending his indignation by pouring out his wrath upon the world, which is consummated with Jesus' return to the earth in judgment. So this means that the 5th course of judgment prescribed in Leviticus, it was never actually fulfilled. So the Bible doesn't actually teach us to think of this last Gentile kingdom that God is going to use to judge his people Israel in terms of a revived Roman Empire. Like, that's a common idea that's out there. I don't know if y'all ever heard of that, but the Bible doesn't actually teach us to think like that. All right. It actually teaches us to think of it as a kingdom that's going to arise from the territory that was historically associated with the Seleucid dynasty of the Greek Empire. And again, just, if you ever look at like the opening to 1 Peter or, the 7 churches of Revelation, those locations that are mentioned there are all in the Seleucid Empire. They're all right up here. You see? And so, and Jesus says that's where Satan's seat dwells. Well, why? Why does Satan's seat dwell somewhere up there? You see? It's because that's where the Antichrist kingdom is going to be. All right? But anyway. So let's see where we're at here. The Bible doesn't teach us to think of this last Gentile kingdom that God's going to use as a revived Roman Empire. All right, but like I said, he's kind of narrowed everything down to pinpoint kind of the territory he's going to come from. I mean, think about it. The Roman Empire was centered in Italy, some 2,500 miles away from the land of Israel. Like, why would God be concerned with that empire? What does that have to do with his land, right? I mean, it did at some point when they had occupied it, but that wasn't really theirs. They were just occupying it, right? I mean, the Seleucid Empire, however, actually encompassed the land of Israel, and it's the land of Israel which is the focus, right? So we have 5 kingdoms described in the image, and what you have there is essentially an overview of all the Gentile kingdoms. Pretty much already went through all this, so that's good. So I think y'all pretty much get it, right? Because, I'm kind of long-winded, so I'm trying to skip stuff for y'all. So Rome's not in view. When you look at, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 11, it just goes from some portion of the Grecian Empire to the little horn, and from some portion of the Grecian Empire to describing a specific man to things that this man's doing that doesn't actually fit historically what the man did. Like him, where he died, it doesn't fit, right? And secular historians will agree, well, no, he didn't die there, so we don't know what is being talked about here at the end of this passage. And so it's narrowing down for us, the audience. And Rome isn't in either of those discussions. It's not there, right? So now we'll wrap it up here and say one more thing here, because all right, well, the times of the Gentiles is a time of judgment, but didn't God let the Jews return from Babylon and build the temple? So how is that judgment? How is that them living during a time of judgment, right? It's the obvious question you might ask yourself. So while the Persian Empire did allow a remnant to return and build Jerusalem, rebuild Jerusalem, you got to understand that the kingdom was not established and free of Gentile control or dominion. They were still under Gentile control, nor did they really live in times of peace. And neither did they actually receive the fulfillment of their promises, okay? Even as they built the wall of Jerusalem, Nehemiah 4 describes the perilous times prophesied in Daniel 9 that they would experience as they worked with a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. Like they're rebuilding the wall and the city with a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. You see that in Nehemiah chapter 4. Verse 17, everyone with one of his hands wrought in the work and with the other hand held a weapon. Right? So they weren't living in times of peace, okay? In the intertestamental period of about a 400-year gap of time during which God didn't speak to the nation of Israel by prophets, the nation continued to strive against Gentile forces, right? That's during that time that Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Those Greeks were actually coming against the Jews, right? That's when that whole Maccabean revolt happened, okay? And so while they were allowed to return, they didn't return to the autonomy and prestige that they had under King David or Solomon, right? So why did God allow them to return during this time of judgment? As we know, God kept Judah in Babylonian captivity for 70 years, and that was 1 year for each Sabbath year they neglected to give the land of Israel. So for 490 years, they neglected to give the land its Sabbaths. And so according to the law, the land was unclean. You got to understand that. And so guess what had to happen for Jesus, for God to come and present himself as king to the land of Israel, to the nation of Israel? First, the land had to be cleansed. Okay, because if he's going to make a real offer to them, and I mean, of course, they're going to reject it, but everything has to be done correctly according to the law, because it had to be a real offer. Okay, he couldn't come in pretense and say, "Well, I'm here for you, but I'm not really offering it to you." No, he had to really make the offer, and in order to really make that offer to Israel as being the Messiah and the Son of David, that land had to be cleansed per the law. So that captivity was necessary, first of all, to cleanse the land. Okay, likewise, we see that the temple during the time before the captivity, and actually during even the captivity, because it happened in waves, but before the temple's destruction, that temple had been polluted by idolatry, and you see that specifically described in Ezekiel. I mean, the priests and the women, they were participating in idolatry in the temple. Okay, and so God had this polluted temple destroyed by the Babylonians, and instead had a faithful remnant return to the land after the land had been cleansed to rebuild the temple, right? So that the prophecies could be fulfilled in regard to the Lord's coming to his temple. And you see that in Malachi. It says, "The Lord shall suddenly come to his temple. The Lord whom you seek shall suddenly come to his temple." So this brief reprieve, it really wasn't a reprieve at all, okay? It was that which was necessary so that Jesus could be manifest to Israel, so that the nation could be cut in half and cleansed, so that the unbelieving portion could be identified and cast off, okay? And so even though a remnant was allowed to return back to Jerusalem, and that city was allowed to be established religiously, they never actually were reestablished politically as their own kingdom, and they were in fact still under Persian, Greek, and then Roman occupation, okay? And so when we read in Luke 21 that Jerusalem will be trodden down to the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, Jesus isn't saying this in a vacuum, right? He tells them that they would be carried away into all nations, right? And that was one of the things the law said that would happen to them, okay? And so I was afraid to give this message, and I see that my fears were warranted, and hopefully I got something out of this. If you actually read the notes, it probably would have been better. My delivery's a little off, so I apologize. But yeah, I just felt like spending a little more time on times of the Gentiles, just to give you all a little more background. Not that it was probably necessary, but hopefully y'all got something out of it. So.